Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Exploring Office to Residential Conversions. My name is Savannah Blance Maria. I am the Programs Coordinator at Connecticut Main Street Center. Today we are discussing these types of conversions because largely due to the COVID-19 pandemic, office buildings across the nation remain vacant. However, many of these vacant office buildings are being purchased and redeveloped into residences to address housing needs. In this webinar, we will explore office to residential trends in the real estate market and case studies of office to residential projects in central Connecticut. In a moment, I will introduce today's speaker, but first, just a few words. Connecticut Main Street Center is the expert resource for developing and sustaining vibrant downtowns and main streets that fuel our state's prosperity. We all know a great downtown when we're in it. It's a feeling and energy that we can sense, see, and experience, but it can be hard to articulate what exactly makes a main street great. So we've broken it down into 6 qualities to make it easier to grasp. There is always dedicated Main Street management. The main street is connected by multiple modes of transportation for people to access. It is welcoming, friendly, and inclusive. Sustainable practices are in place that bring life and vibrancy for today and for the future. Small businesses are supported and encouraged, as well as residential and commercial development. And there is a unique sense of place. It is our mission to assess, educate, and convene around these topics, central to advancing communities across Connecticut to establish and maintain vibrant main streets. We are grateful to our sponsors and funding partners that make this work possible. Connecticut Main Street Center's founding sponsors are Eversource and the State of Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development. Additional funding comes from Webster Bank, Travelers, and Liberty Bank. With that, I am very excited to introduce our speakers for today's session, Eric Amodio, Managing Broker at Amodio Realty, and Alyssa Kent, Senior Development Manager and Design Director at Spinnaker Real Estate Partners. With that, I will pass it over to Eric.
Thanks, Savannah. So a little bit about me. I have been in commercial brokerage for better part of 15 years now, handling all types of asset classes. I received my degree in finance and my MBA in real estate, both from Bentley University up in Boston. I tested for and received my CCIM designation in 2017, which helps with financial analysis and decision-making in real estate transactions. I had the pleasure of serving in 2022 as the president of the Connecticut CCIM chapter and still maintain a position on the board as a director today. I also have experience in a multifamily capacity with a private investment group locally, and I'm occasionally called upon to be an expert witness for commercial real estate litigation cases. In 2018, I received the National Association of Realtor Commercial Award for Connecticut and also the 40 Under 40 Award by the Hartford Business Journal. Several of the clients that our firm has worked with include Goodwin University, Laz Investments, North Point Management, Stanley Black & Decker, among others. So really, why office conversions? Office conversions or conversions in general are nothing new. We see many other properties, including industrial properties, that have been transitioned into a new life as residential spaces. And now we're really seeing a resurgence in office buildings being used for that purpose. I've really broken it down into 3 main demand drivers for conversion. One is, we're seeing a reduced demand for physical office space with an increased demand for remote and hybrid type work. Was this caused by COVID? I think it was really just pushed along, and it was accelerated by COVID. It was something that we saw in the market with trends in space changing, and I think COVID just really pushed it over the edge. We're seeing a younger workforce that is desiring remote and hybrid options. So that's really changing the demand for office. Two, you've got aging office buildings and increased operating costs for those buildings. Many of the office buildings that we see in the Connecticut market, especially in the greater Hartford market, those date back many decades. So these buildings are now coming up for major capital expense improvements, and just the cost to operate these buildings is growing every year. So the owners of the properties have to make a decision. Do we put that money into the property? Do we make it more attractive? Are we going to see a return on that money? So in many cases with the C and B class properties, those owners are deciding, well, with a high vacancy rate in our property and plus the cost to make them competitive, let's sell the property or let's develop it ourselves into a new use as residential. The other thing is number three is that as many of us have heard, there is a huge lack of housing, especially in the state of Connecticut. I've seen reports where they're saying up to 100,000 units are lacking in supply. So there's a demand certainly for more multifamily units in the state. And so what do? We look to these existing vacant office buildings as an option to convert. Owners and developers are seeing a premium in the rent that they can achieve on a square foot basis in the multifamily market versus using it as traditional office. And I would say also on number three that given the lack of multifamily properties available to purchase to investors, still with a high demand from investors, there is an opportunity there where conversion makes sense, just to put more supply out there on the market. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to go through 3 case studies that I was personally involved in on the brokerage side. One of them was 480 Myrtle Street in New Britain, another 621 Farmington Avenue in Hartford, and then finally 30 Bank Street in New Britain. So the first case study, 480 Myrtle Street, the deal story here is it's approximately 132,000 square foot Class A/B office. This was actually built originally by Stanley Tool, which later became Stanley Black & Decker, as a manufacturing facility, a multi-story manufacturing facility back in the heyday. It was turned into office space in the early 90s. In 2018, our firm was brought in to sell the property because it was no longer needed and the facilities were moved to other locations. So we transacted a $980,000 sale to a Brooklyn, New York investor. That investor thought, as some out-of-town folks do, that there was opportunity to just continue its use. And certainly they found during their ownership that there was no continued demand for office space, especially where this was located. So in 2022, we were hired again to transact for this owner, netting him a very nice profit. It was sold for $2.5 million, about $19 a square foot, to a local developer that you've probably seen in the news with several New Britain projects by the name of Amit Lakotia. Amit had bought the property and received approvals for a conversion to 106 market rate units. Now, the neat thing about this property is it is located within the Energy and Innovation Park, which in New Britain is a fuel cell and data center park. So on the conversion side of this property, on the left side of the slide here, you can see the former layout as it was with the office space, with all the cubicles. So this was able to have new life put into it. On the conversion, like I said, 106 units, mix of studios, 1 and 2 bedrooms. The neat thing about this property, the layout allowed with a wide open layout, it allowed for conversion fairly easily because you were able to put a center corridor hallway and have apartments on both sides of that. Plenty of windows, everything was in place. Being that it was built as an industrial manufacturing use originally, you have those concrete mushroom style columns, which the architect was able to put into the plan as a nice design element. All of the infrastructure was in place on this property. You had center core elevators, 2 residential and 1 freight. You had staircases on both ends. It really laid out nicely and was, made for a nice conversion for the developer. Now, this property, as I said, was in an area that mainly was residential. So as it's kind of grandfathered use, what the municipality did was they used an ARUD zone, adaptive reuse of underutilized industrial buildings district. And that's how they were able to take this property, former office, and allow it through their zoning to become multifamily residential. On the next slide, there's a few pictures here of kind of the former 90s office that it once was. And then the following slide was the proposed conversion that is in progress as we speak. So these are some renderings that include, the movie theater room, some very nicely appointed market rate apartments, and then one of the mock-up layouts that you can see here. So all in all, a very nice conversion that is in progress. There were a few delays that I've heard from the developer in financing, which we'll talk about. But it is moving along, and I believe they're slated for a spring-summer opening. The next case study I want to talk about is 621 Farmington Avenue in Hartford. This is located just a stone's throw from the West Hartford line, right on Farmington Avenue. This deal was also interesting in the sense that it was in a great location. It just didn't work as an office building anymore. At the time of sale, this was 90% vacant. There really were only 2 small mom and pop tenants in the building. It was in very rough shape internally, had been pretty much abandoned in its use for years. It did have a few great elements, though. It was in a great location, or is in a great location. It does have surface parking lot right behind it for 24 cars. It's right on the transit line. You have a bus stop right in front of the property. And so we were brought in on the brokerage side in this past year, 2024, to rebalance our client's portfolio. This was one property within their large portfolio. And this was just something that wasn't making sense for them anymore. And we marketed the property as a residential conversion and had tremendous interest. And I think that's the theme here, is that as the broker, how it's marketed for its next life makes all the difference in the sale. So all 3 of these case studies, they were marketed as residential conversion projects rather than marketing them to an office user or an office investor. So we had the sale here, $700,000 or $32 a square foot. The one thing I'll say on this project is that the buyer was, I guess he really, he had a lot of faith in it. He closed on the deal without going for any approvals. It was a very short timeline on the closing, and he really just felt that it was going to work no matter what. So he bought the property, planned for 20 to 24 units. I had a call yesterday with him, and he actually got it approved for 29 units. So it really is working out nicely. So it's still in its planning and development stage. These are a few before photos. As I said, very rough. It was left, it was never really maintained well. It was just left in this state in the photos at the time of sale. And as I said, it's still in this development stage. So I don't have any renderings to show, but I'm sure it will turn out very nicely. The final case study I want to discuss is the 30 Bank Street in New Britain. And if you've been through downtown New Britain lately, there's a beehive of activity. You have the Brit and the High Railer ground up new developments, approximately 200 market rate units going up. The 30 Bank Street property is just behind those 2. So it's adjacent to the Connecticut Fast Track bus terminal. It's a great location. This is a 27,000 square foot building, Class B, very nicely maintained. It was owned and 100% occupied for use by the Connecticut Bar Association. We were brought in on the brokerage side in 23 to do a sale of the property. It just didn't work any longer for the bar association. They felt they'd rather relocate and become a tenant. So this asset was sold off, and we were able to procure a developer out of New Jersey for a $900,000 sale, $35 a square foot. We then relocated the bar association to their new home off of I-91 in Meriden. On the next slide, a conversion of this property, the developers named this the Dream Apartments. They went for approvals prior to closing for 34 residential units, mix of studios and 1 bedrooms. This was really aimed at the younger workforce they were trying to attract. The layout of this property has about 6,500 square foot floor plates. So on the smaller side of these 3 examples, there's no on-site parking, but there, as I said, they have the fast track stop across, as well as the municipal parking garage on the other side of this property, which they were able to work out a parking arrangement. This was in the CBD district zoning, which allowed for apartments as of right. So this was a little bit easier in terms of some others that have to go for change of use type arrangements. There was a variance sought on this property because even though the apartments were allowed as conversion, first floor apartments were not allowed. So they were able to achieve that variance, and now they're going to have ground level first floor apartments, which also was something that the Brit and the High Railer next door were able to achieve as well. So on the next slide, here's a few photos of its state at time of sale. As I said, very, very nice condition, move-in ready, beautiful office space. And then the proposed conversion of this property, you could see the rendering at night, and then a few of the layouts of the apartments. Pretty compact, tight spaces, again, aimed at young singles, workforce type housing, but very nice, nicely appointed. A few amenities that they planned for the basement, gym, all the usual type amenities. And then I also want to discuss, there's a few other deals. Those 3 were ones that I was involved in. There's 3 others that were recently in the news here in the pipeline. 23 Maiden Lane in North Haven, Silas Dean in Rocky Hill, and Laurel Street in Hartford. And you can see that the pricing and the per square foot pricing and how that kind of impacts the overall development. The one in North Haven here, they're going to maintain the first floor as commercial use, while the others, they're going to go for full apartment conversions. So that's a little bit about what I've been involved in. I'll turn it over to Savannah.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you. If there are questions that we'll answer at the end, please feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A. And with that, I will pass it over to Alyssa Kent. Thank you. Thanks again, Eric.
Great. Good morning, everybody. My name is Alyssa Kent. I am Senior Development Manager for Spinnaker Real Estate Partners. I'm also a proud board member of Connecticut Main Street. My background is I'm trained as an architect. I went to architecture school at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and first entered the development world working with Becker and Becker Associates, where we had an integrated architecture and development studio based here out of Fairfield, Connecticut, and did work throughout the tri-state. And spent 12 years with them designing and learning the ropes of the development world before later joining Spinnaker, where I've been for, I think, 7 years now. In total, I've developed, personally developed in a project management basis about 5,500 units and over $1 billion of assets in much larger portfolios, but these are kind of the direct projects that I was managing. and have done a few office to residential conversions that I'll highlight in two case studies. But underscores the impact of conversions of many types within the marketplace. Our specialty at Spinnaker, but also at Becker and Becker, is in multifamily housing and mixed use developments. And we've used in both firms have used conversions of different types, whether industrial to residential or office to residential. Particularly when we're looking at multi-phase developments and historic preservation. So on the screen, you can see just a highlight of some of the projects I've worked on. Most of these are within the tri-state area. Several, almost half, have some kind of historic renovation, and then the two that I'll go through our office to residential conversions. So the first one I would want to talk about is a project that's currently under construction called 55 Elm Street. It is on the corner of, or right on Pulaski Circle, very near the State House. It sort of sits in what I call the trident between downtown, the State House, and Hartford Hospital. This is a landmark building that's undergoing a historic renovation. It was originally a bank and trust, and then followed by the state's attorney's office and state office space for quite some time. It was essentially mothballed in the 2000s and sat vacant for several years until we started the conversion just about 2 years ago. If you hit the next slide, Savannah, it consists of two separate buildings, the larger kind of elbow-shaped building, and then this smaller building that you can see on this slide, which is where they used to perform all the printing and press work for the main building. They're connected. Actually, if you want to just go back one slide real quick, Savannah, they are connected via a skyway, which you can see in the upper right corner of that photo, as well as a basement passageway. And we have, what you can't see in this image is a large courtyard that we plan to activate both with the retail and the residential programming between the buildings that create kind of a unique urban experience, that feels very intimate and cool. So this project began construction just about 2 years ago. It has 160 units, best in class amenities, including a gym, an on-site restaurant. We're trying to work with potentially a brewery or distillery for a tap room, unique co-working space, lounge space, podcast rooms, really class A amenities. There is a portion of affordability within our deal with the city of Hartford and with financing from the Capital Region Development Authority, in addition to compliance requirements within the actual development and construction. And what's unique about 55 Elm Street is a couple of things. It's obviously the historic nature of the building and its history. It had quite good layouts and opportunity for conversion to residential, but it also had these opportunities for some destination style retail and commercial aspects, including this on-site restaurant, which will operate sort of like a hotel restaurant, as well as this space below the building in this image, the press building, that offers kind of a really deep, vast space that, again, we're trying to attract a kind of a tap room or destination style amenities towards. If you can go to the next slide. Just wanted to talk a little bit about, I think Eric did a great job talking about some of the smaller projects and smaller buildings, and how those can be great repurposes into residential. I wanted to present a couple larger buildings that may really only occur in some of our larger municipalities, but talk about how critical the massing and the suitability of dimensions are on these larger buildings, where you need, it's a larger development cost and construction cost, and which makes it necessary for unit variability. We can't just put micro studios in a building of this size and make it fit the market. So we really need to be offering everything from studios up to 2 and 3 bedrooms. So within that, it's critical that the dimensions of the building are suitable for conversion to residential. Anywhere between 65 and 80-foot width is great for getting units in. The cadence of windows, we look for bays anywhere between 10 and 12 feet to create rooms. Those are really critical things just right off the bat to understand whether it's suitable for conversion. And then elevators and stairs being properly placed to meet code for egress is another critical thing. The upfront costs on converting a building are already high. So if we are having to add or do major demolition and cutouts to create new stairways and elevator cores, it can quickly blow and make a project not pencil out. So these two images are of 55 Elm Street. You can see how the corridor in this building is off center, and that's because of the historic nature and some of the things that we wanted to and were required to preserve as part of the renovation. And I should just pause there. I'm a historic preservation specialist in the development world. It's a wonderful program both on the state and federal level. If done right, it absolutely can make projects that wouldn't work otherwise work. I think sometimes developers and owners are scared of all the requirements that come up with historic preservation. But I think as communities and cities, we need to really focus on which buildings have value to be saved and reason to be saved, and think about creative reuses for them. And that's exactly what the tax credit programs do and offer here. So in this case, it required that we had an offset corridor, but the unit dimensions still worked. And you can see that we have smaller units on the inside portion of the elbow and these kind of larger units on the outside portion of the elbow. And for what we lose in challenges, both in construction and coordination, in terms of the number of units that we have and types of units, we gain in really interesting mix of units. We have a lot to offer in this building in terms of volumes and finishes and sizes and unique features within a unit. We have units with vault doors. We have units with exposed brick, with unique wood details. So it's really offers quite a bit of interesting things that present a story to a potential tenant or resident, and make it a highly marketable building, but also adds complexity through the construction and design process. So just talking a little bit about the successes and challenges within this project, and obviously we're not quite done yet, but we're getting close. Support from the city and neighborhood was a huge success. The planning was well developed, particularly considering the complexity of the building and the number of unique elements that we were dealing with. There's a neighborhood tax agreement. We were working with an experienced team. We had some major challenges too. The utility work to serve this building was complex. Just with most rehab and historic projects, there were plenty of surprises. We were still dealing with supply chain issues that started during COVID, but haven't quite recovered, particularly as it pertains to electrical equipment. And then we had, because we used unique financing, which included low interest loan through Capital Region Development Authority, as well as tax credits, we had a myriad of compliance requirements on this job. So a great project. Would encourage anyone on this call to reach out if you would like a tour. A really interesting conversion for what has spent almost 100 years being an office building, and now will have new life with residential. The next project is also in Hartford, ironically. It's called 777 Main Street. It also, Savannah, yeah, there we are, sorry. It also was a former bank and trust building, much larger footprint, key downtown location. It sat vacant for many years. And this building was not on the National Historic Register when we acquired it, or when we were working towards the deal of acquiring it. It had been through a number of different banks. It was a Bank of America building before we took it over, and it, like I said, it had sat vacant for quite a while. We got this building put on the National Historic Register specifically to be able to engage historic tax credits to redevelop the project. This underwent a complete certified historic renovation. It was completed in around 2016. I think we had some retail that spilled out a little beyond that, and it was converted to 269 apartments over, gosh, I think 26 floors. And again, key location in downtown Hartford. This one was done with Becker and Becker Associates. And this one, actually, I've done many historic renovations. This was one of the easier ones to complete because of the mid-century nature of the building. And I wanted to do this one as a case study because it's a good example of some of the office conversions that we are seeing on the market, both in larger scale like this and smaller scale in terms of what Eric had shown. And mid-century, I think many of us don't think of mid-century buildings as having historic value, but they certainly are being recognized. This one was Beckett building, who was an accomplished architect. So it's always worth understanding the history of the building, even if it doesn't sit on historic register to determine maybe what the value of the preservation might be. If you want to go to the next slide, Savannah. And so this photo is of the top floor amenity space at 777 Main, which was restored to really emulate what had been there. The building was in fantastic shape. From a finishes perspective, there was no guessing as to what the historic components were of the building, but had some challenges in regards to some of the mechanical aspects and challenges because the building was essentially mothballed and without power for quite some time. So that's always an important part of assessing these buildings for reuse is the condition that they are in, how long they've been vacant. As Eric alluded to, some of his buildings were well maintained, and that's obviously makes the dollars and cents work out a little quite a bit better when we're talking about converting. So some of the successes at 777 is this was a really ideal layout for conversions, lots of repeatable floors, not nearly the challenges that I've had at 55 Elm Street in terms of dealing with lots of unique floor plates and changes in floor plates and offset quarters and things like that. 777 had a really ideal floor plan for conversion. We did have some challenges in terms of egress that we were able to work with the local jurisdictions as well as the state to really assess and come up with logical ways to keep residents safe and be adhering to the local building codes. We had impactful green building initiatives on this building. It received a platinum score from the U.S. Green Building for a LEED score. And again, an experienced team here. This was a large conversion, needed the right market analysis all the way through the right construction, and we had that team assembled. The challenges here were we had a lot of retail space and a lot of basement space that were at risk here. Really challenging to some of it is street front along Main Street, but a lot of it was not street front, destination style, or even in the basement. And really figuring out the best use case for that retail and back of house space was challenging to figure out. As I mentioned, the condition of the building from a mechanical standpoint, the elevators were seized up. There were a lot of surprises from mechanicals that we thought would be able to reuse, but because the building was vacant for quite some time, it was challenging. And then like many deals that are historic renovation, complex financing and reporting, and working through those things. So these are all considerations that municipalities need to understand, as well as individual developers, in terms of how to make office to a conversion really ideal and profitable for the owners, and bring life back into spaces that are currently underutilized. I'm going to send that back over to Savannah. I think we had Eric's going to take some summary, and then we'll go into questions.
Thank you, Alyssa. So a few of you had submitted questions in the registration box where there's an opportunity to leave any questions. So Eric has prepared some slides that kind of answer those questions. So I'll pass it back to Eric now to go over those, and then we will continue with the rest of the Q&A coming in from the Q&A and the chat here on this call.
Thanks, Savannah. Yeah, so there's a couple questions I put together here. The big question I'm always asked is, are all office buildings good candidates for conversion? And really a short answer is no, but there's always, it depends. The main thing in real estate, of course, is location, location, location. So, is the office building a good candidate for conversion? Let's see where it's located. How is the housing demand in that location? How does that play out? How does that measure up? And what are the competing developments in that area look like? So that would be something I would start there first. Then you want to also look for a friendly municipality. Not all municipalities, I think there's 168 in Connecticut, I believe. Not all of them are developer friendly. And so if I was a developer, I'd want to be focusing my time and efforts and finances in those areas where that it's going to be a very simple, or as simple as possible, permitting process. If you need to go for variances, they're going to expedite those things for you. I've seen cases where, just to get on the calendar for a zoning hearing or variance, you're many months out. And so, that can really delay the time frame. And all the while in the background, you've got changes in financing, changes in interest rates, changes in demand, construction costs that don't seem to go down, only up. And so you need to move quickly. The physical configuration and condition that Alyssa and I have touched on, that is, I think, a huge factor as well. You've got to look and see, is this particular building a good candidate in that, how does the floor plate lay out? Is it too large? Is it long and narrow? Is it one big box? How will the hallways lay out? Where are the elevators and the staircases in relation to that? Also, the access to daylight. The 30 Bank Street property, I believe they're going to have to actually go and enlarge the windows because it doesn't meet fire marshal regulation now for egress, because they're very narrow windows as they sit. So that's something they're looking at. Mechanical systems. As office buildings, typically, your rent is a gross rent, so all inclusive. So you don't have separately metered utilities. Whereas on some of the smaller conversions, they may want to have separate electric, separate gas, separate heat and hot water for the tenants to pay rather than the landlord. So that could be a total changeover, whether it's a good candidate or not. Former uses are certainly an important factor. There's no getting away from environmental concerns. Those have to be taken care of either by the buyer or the seller. So there's always a negotiation factor there. On the 480 Myrtle project I discussed, that was originally a manufacturing use. In the 90s, it was cleaned up, and but still, when it went to conversion of a residential, there was a small area that was put on a land use restriction, so that couldn't be touched in the parking lot particularly. So that was a piece of the puzzle in terms of the environmental. And then whether or not it's a good conversion candidate, does it have the additional items, parking, spaces for amenities? You know, Alyssa talked about on Elm Street, you know, having a space for a restaurant. I mean, that's a huge driver for tenancy. That's a huge driver just for the community involvement. Those are all good things. You know, there's what they call, like, you know, an arms race for the amenities. You've got, you know, everybody has a gym now. Everybody has a pet spa. It's just what's next, and who can compete with each other to make it bigger and better. And certainly, do the rents justify the purchase and conversion? Because if it doesn't pencil out, it's not a viable investment. And you know, we could talk more about how you bridge that gap with financing and tax credits, and that's how the municipalities can get involved and make these projects really work. On the next slide, common obstacles that I've seen to conversion. Really, I'd boil it down to two. Alyssa could probably speak to some others, but really two big ones: the zoning and entitlement process, as we discussed, whether or not it would go through zoning to make it easier for conversion from office to residential, and then financing. If the money's not there, nothing happens. There was a legislative change that I was watching the other day. This was back from May, a Senate Bill 416 that now doesn't require a special zoning commission hearing to go from office to residential. They're trying to make it as of right. You know, certainly there are still there's still processes within the municipality to go through to get your final approvals, but this is one step in the right direction, I think, to expedite that process. So the next slide. And then what's the impact on the local economy? I don't have facts and figures on it here, but there's short-term and long-term benefits, of course. In the short term, you can see during the conversion and construction phase, you know, you certainly have increased patronage to restaurants and hotels. Typically, when you're bringing in the trades to the area to do this work, and if they're coming from out of town, and hopefully you'll use local contractors and trades. So that would be, in the short term during construction, a benefit to the local economy. And then in the longer term, upon completion and lease up, you know, you'll have new residents to live, work, and play in that local economy. You'll inevitably add supply, which is going to drive demand for additional restaurants, personal services, et cetera. And ultimately, in the long term, you'll add to the grand list for the municipality for tax purposes. So those are really three FAQs that I put together, and we can go over some others that the audience has.
Thank you, Eric. To you and Alyssa, I'm going to read off a few more questions for you. Do you have any statistics on success of conversions over at least a 5-year period?
Sure. So, you know, we do strictly multifamily residential and mixed use developments. And there's, in addition to the few that I showed on as case studies, we've successfully sold a few projects that have been demonstrated fully stabilized, continue to be fully stabilized, and then well positioned for sale within the market. And so projects anywhere from things that we're building right now and pre-leasing and through those for sale projects. The key is making sure that you have the right market, that there's demand for the type of housing that's being produced. In my case, we look at we're doing dense rental housing. So we're doing market studies to make sure that we're underwriting the correct rents, and that our rents are going to quickly stabilize and lead to stabilized buildings in a proper amount of time, that we're going to beat our underwriting. So the market analysis can't be underscored in terms of realistic rents, factoring in the cost to produce inclusionary affordable housing, or even more affordable housing than what's required, and making sure that that all can be accomplished within the appropriate timeline to reach stabilization.
Thank you, Alyssa. There's another question that came in for you. When they do mixed use from industrial to residential, did they face pushback from the town regarding loss of tax revenue? Also, what is allowed to continue in the space once it is converted to residential, i.e. commercial, manufacturing, etc.?
Sure. So I haven't been involved in a project where we've had continuing manufacturing during conversion, or even on the same site. I'm sure there's examples out there, but we participate in conversions where their use is completely changing over. Most of the time, I haven't encountered a deal yet where the conversion to residential doesn't grow the grand list. So that's a unique circumstance. There's certainly deals out there where tax revenue is coming in for prior uses, and maybe there's an interim change in tax revenue. But all the deals I've participated on have shown increased tax revenue, at least after a pilot or a phase in of taxes. Certainly, tax structure is an important part of penciling out a deal if that's what the deal requires. And municipalities need to look to their economic goals to understand how long they can wait for either that tax revenue to stabilize or to increase per the development. I don't know if do you have anything to add there, Eric, in terms of have you seen projects where the town is getting significant tax revenue from a commercial building, and it's gone down because of conversions?
No, I haven't. I mean, the ones that I've been involved in, these have pretty much been vacant or nearly vacant properties anyway. And
Yeah.
so even during that, kind of ramping down of its office use, certainly it's in the interest of the ownership, even prior to them thinking of selling, to keep fighting their tax bill and trying to drive that number down as low as possible with little income on the property. So yeah, as you said, I see it, maybe not year one, but certainly as you ramp up, and if you have different tax deals that have been worked out to make the project pencil, in the longer term, you have certainly an increase big time from its former use.
Thank you. Are there changes to the state building and fire codes that would be helpful in facilitating these conversions?
It's a good question.
Yeah, it's a loaded question. It's so unique. I think every time I've thought of a change to fire codes that would help a historic renovation or a conversion, the next project presents kind of a whole new unique set of circumstances. So I think ultimately giving the jurisdiction authority does help when we can have a smooth and process for reviewing unique conditions, understanding risk. I've done plenty of state building code modifications over the years, and that process has improved, and I think continuing to improve that process, and taking away kind of the barriers and the length of time that it takes to get through them. But that's a good question, and it maybe is a good place for like a little roundtable at some point to take key stakeholders and understand what are the challenges that we've seen in projects since the last building code adaptation, or adoption, and look at what we experienced in development and construction that either added cost or time, and see if there's common threads there. But in the interim, I think continuing to expedite and have smooth processes for unique overview and appeals processes is the best we can do.
Thank you. Is there a reason that these projects tend to be rentals as opposed to condos or co-ops that allow for ownership?
That's a good question. I actually have been thinking that, with such the influx of rental housing that's been coming on the market the past, 5, 10 years, 15 years, really don't see a lot of new condo projects, at least, in my local market here, Greater Hartford. But it certainly was something that over the years, folks have said to me, why aren't there more condos being built? And, it may just boil down on the developer side to, sources and uses of the funds. Are they able to get the types of funds and the types of tax breaks and the types of grants and those things, if it was going to be a condo project? I don't know the answer, but that may be one of the reasons. And certainly from the brokerage side, I see much more demand from institutional investors that are going to buy, several hundred unit property as an investment versus, the return for, single individual buyers of condo units.
Yeah, Eric, you hit the nail on the head in terms of marketability of a for sale package at the end. We do not engage in condos, and it really boils down to one thing: is the exposure for litigation from multiple parties is too great to bear in an overall risk assessment. So it's a change in the market that I think we're seeing everywhere in the country. There's obviously been a number of cases recently that have highlighted the amount of exposure. The collapse of the building down in Miami. There's several fires in condominium. But there's examples of much more minor things, obviously not minor to residents that are living there and that have owned their condominium, but water leaks, deficiency in materials or piping or things like that. Either in a rental environment, you're handling that as ownership, you're submitting one insurance claim, you're handling things internally. In a condominium environment, you're being sued by individual owners in addition to the condominium association. It's really a challenging environment.
Thanks, Alyssa. Eric, there's a question for you. Was your firm involved in any of the early efforts to change zoning prior to marketing these properties as residential conversions, or was that path cleared for you before you came into it?
So our firm wasn't brought in on that side of things. We brought these to market as they sat, without going for any pre-approvals or change of use. At the time that these properties were sold, the demand was just so great that it was a seller's best case. There are multiple offer scenarios all around, and the buyers took that risk on or put it into their due diligence that they would go for those approvals as part of their purchase. In the 30 Bank Street sale, that was like I said, a CBD zone, which allowed apartment conversion by right. They still had some other variances and things that they went for. The 480 Myrtle Street, that was a very long, well, relatively long. It's probably 18-month start to finish on that with the A-RUD zoning and all of the elements that went into that closing. But we were not brought in to do any change of use or get anything pre-approved prior to marketing.
Thank you. And Eric, one more thing for you. In any of the the developments that you showed in your presentation, like the case studies, are there any affordable units in these developments, and affordable as defined by state statute?
I want to say that's a great question. That's a great question. I want to say the 480 Myrtle project is some flavor of mix of affordable units.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And are there incentives now for such development, tax and otherwise, which you've not seen before? If so, what are they?
You have anything, Alyssa?
Yeah, I haven't seen anything very specific to the office market. We're talking to local leaders all the time about their priorities in terms of conversions or attracting companies back to using underutilized office space. And so those conversations naturally lead to starting to talk about tax abatement deals, different ways of structuring our financing so that we can make deals work. So I haven't seen anything through the legislature or through targeted deals from any of the municipalities to directly kind of promote office to residential conversion. But those are all things that are being discussed as we're doing due diligence and looking at properties, and even having municipalities bring properties to us. Those are all things that are discussed, early in the process.
Thank you. A comment for you both to comment on. I'd like to hear more about what economic developers should look for in floor plates, elevator layout, openable windows, and domestic water and sewage infrastructure when considering whether to promote a property as convertible to residential.
Yeah, so from an architecture perspective, if you have, if a municipality has an expert in-house that can kind of take an assessment of like basic building code, distance of corridors, exit distancing, like I said, anywhere between 65 and 75 feet of a depth of a floor plate is a great depth, whether it's straight in line or goes in a U shape or even a full circle. So there are some basics out there in terms of desirable versus less desirable floor plates that I think most municipalities either have some capability in-house to take an assessment and put different properties into different buckets of great reuse, possible reuse, and seems more challenging. Elevators for buildings that are more than 3 stories are always critical. We usually say 1 elevator to every 80 to 100 units, with no elevator building having under two elevators is kind of a rule of thumb. Operable windows is not necessarily required, and many commercial buildings or office buildings don't have them. We've done many, actually, I think all but one of my office to resi conversions have had inoperable windows, and that does not seem to be a market deterrent for potential renters. It does require that we have different types of HVAC systems and makeup air and fresh air return, but that is not one of the things that and then I think there's always a little bit of concern of how do you make sure a building feels residential, that feels like a place that isn't an office building, both from the exterior and even the lobby and things like that. And working with design teams and or even on a municipal level to say, like, I can envision how that could feel more residential, like somewhere where that somebody, a prospective resident, wouldn't just walk by and not even realize it's an apartment building. And that doesn't have to be, Eric has some great examples of buildings that look very commercial, but signage, is it walkable? Is it maybe feel like a office building, but is in a great kind of location for residential? So those are all considerations.
Thanks, Alyssa. So we'll end with two questions kind of wrapped into one. Eric, you did touch on this a little bit, but they'd like to know, how can a town not be difficult for developers? In other words, how are the difficult towns different from the easy ones? And how can a local government best assist to ensure a successful conversion?
What I've seen, especially locally here in New Britain, where we're based out of, is when a development kind of comes to the table, I would say New Britain is very developer friendly, especially in the past several years. And what I see at City Hall is they all kind of come together. All the departments come together and they take lead on it, and they make sure that all of the meetings and everything can kind of happen as quickly as possible and try and fast track. And I think that that's really the takeaway, is how the municipalities, if they can fast track things, and just talk with the developer and say, what are your pain points? How can I make this easy for you? Rather than just throwing the book at them and saying, this is how it's done. And, if you're not going to do it by our rules, well, then go somewhere else. So that's what I see here locally, is that they come together, all the departments, and try and make things move as quickly as possible. Certainly if they can go to other extents, like, dropping permitting fees, or, cutting the number of meetings that are required, or, changing some of their rulings on what needs a variance and not. That's a little bit of a bigger discussion, but certainly there are pro-development towns and cities in Connecticut versus those that are not.
Yeah, just to really quick add on top of that, whether it's a big building in any municipality or a moderately sized building in a small municipality, I think one thing that cities and municipalities can be looking at is redirecting permitting fees and encouraging developers to use third-party peer reviews, so that we're not overburdening. We're using everybody's expertise where they're aligned. So if your building department or your engineering department is accustomed to working in single family houses and the like, let's keep them working on that. And a complex conversion, we can use a third party review, a peer review model that will be better for everyone, is something that I think really can change in Connecticut.
Thank you. Thank you both again today for your insight and your presentation on office to residential conversions. So we'll close now with some ending remarks, and everyone will receive a link to the survey, and members will receive slides and the recording later. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We invite you to join the more than 80 communities around the state committed to improving their Main Street by becoming a member of Connecticut Main Street Center. As a member, you receive exclusive help and resources to support your downtown work. Please visit ctmainstreet.org to learn more. Registration is now open for our February webinar, The Secret to a Successful and Thriving Downtown, What It Is and How to Get There. Join us from 11 a.m. to 12 noon on February 20th, 2025. Please register at ctmainstreet.org/events. Register now for our March 2025 summit in collaboration with the Capital Region Council of Governments, 10 years of TOD and the road ahead. The summit will be held at Parkville Market in Hartford. Registration is now open. An early bird Early bird ticket pricing ends on January 31st. Once again, we thank our sponsors and program partners. When you exit this webinar, you should be prompted to complete an evaluation for this presentation. Please take a moment to share your thoughts as it helps us shape our programming so it is most valuable to you. Thank you. That concludes today's webinar. Have a great day.